So welcome, Dominic.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Looking at all your faces, this is very, very unusual. So, let's see how we go with this. Just a few words before I get into the talk properly about this virus that we have going around. I don't think anything happens by accident. I think there's a reason as to why we have this virus. I follow international events and international politics, and I've been doing so ever since I was a teenager. I do believe that the reason we have this virus is because it effectively stopped the possibility of a world war. So as dark as it might seem to be to us, I'll try to think of it in positive terms. That it actually has helped us get through a period where things might have got spiraled out of control. So having said that, I'll start talking about what I wanted to talk about today. When I became a minister, I did two things. I did so because I wanted to dedicate myself to the spiritualist philosophy and to the VSU in particular, because in my mind they are a leading light worldwide of the philosophy of spiritualism. But the other thing that I promised to do when I became a minister was to bring to the world, or to help bring to the world, a new concept of what we think this God is that's out there. Because I do believe there's a lot of misunderstanding about what God is, and that misunderstanding has come about because of the religions that we have had in this world up to date. Now, those religions are products of millennia ago. We're talking about religions that started up 1,000, 2,000 years ago, and some even before that. So that philosophy and those views have been brought forward into our time, and they contain ideas which are really very old and need to be changed, reviewed, updated. And I believe one of the reasons our philosophy exists, one of the reasons, apart from letting people know who they are and that in fact they survive the death of their physical bodies. I mean, that's the fundamental thing we teach. But I think beyond that, the undercurrent is that there's a new view about who God is, what it is, and how we relate to it. So if we talk about the old God, and a quick review of the God of the one that most of you would know of, which is the God Yahweh from the Old Testament, we need to understand that this God was born out of tribalism. It was a tribal God for a specific tribe. And then in the next tribe, just down the road, they had a different God. And those gods were at war with each other. And if you read the Old Testament, you will see this. You will see how our God is better than your God. And the reason our army beat your army is because our God is more powerful than your God. So that God was also used as a means of uniting a scattered group of people into one group. This is the different Jewish tribes came together under this Yahweh. So we had the 12 tribes brought together under one God, one government, one king. It was convenient for people ruling at the time to be able to say that God decreed all this. So that was the reason why this Yahweh came about. And the type of worship that was associated with it was, you can almost call it pagan, because they had sacrifices and all of those sorts of things. And as it's come down to us through Christianity, we see this God portrayed in Orthodox religions in some very, very, what I would call strange and unusual ways, which if we think about it with our modern minds, should not make all that much sense. For instance, we're taught about a God who needs something. a needy God who needs our worship and our belief, as if this God was somehow incomplete without those two things. I mean, in the old days, it said, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Well, goodness, what other gods are there to have before this God? There's only one God, and we are all its children. So the fact that we can see that this God is needy in some way is due to the way in which different religions have portrayed their own concept of God to say this is the only concept that is real. And when you believe in this God, you have to believe through our doctrines, through our religion, because there's no other way of doing it. And if you do it through somebody else's religion or somebody else's viewpoint, then all manner of dire consequences are visited upon you. You know, you go to hell, whatever, those sorts of things. So somehow this God is portrayed also as being capable of failing to do something. I mean, if it wanted all of us to believe in it, it could do so with just a click of the fingers, if you like that. And somehow it needs us in order to help it fulfill its requirements. So people go out and they become missionaries and they tell people about this God. They feel as though they need to share their understanding with everybody else, as if that was the only way to get people to understand this thing. Well, there are many different religions. Who's to say which one is correct? No one really knows. Which book are we going to listen to? Are we going to look at the Bible and say this book is the only book that makes any sense? A Muslim will say, well, I've got the Quran and that's the only one that makes any sense. We have Hindus, Buddhists. Somehow, God is, in my view, God is beyond all of this sort of stuff, and we need to find out about that God. And the other terrible teaching about this God is that somehow this God, if we don't do the right thing, it will separate itself from us. Now, whatever your view of hell is, and some people's view of hell is that it is just a separateness from God, not being able to stand in God's company. Even worse is that it might punish you for thinking the wrong thing, for going to the wrong religion, for going to the wrong church. I mean, if you take a look at Christianity and just the Protestant side of Christianity, there are literally thousands of different subgroups of that Christianity. If you go to the United States and you look at the Baptist Church, for instance, you'll see that there are hundreds of subdivisions of the Baptist Church. And each of them think that the other mob hasn't got it right. Yeah, so who's got the truth? Well, the truth is that nobody knows what the real truth is. So having put this to you as a background for where we come from, along comes spiritualism. And spiritualism is relatively new. The VSU is the oldest spiritualist organisation in the world. Later on this year we will celebrate our 150th anniversary. And that's about as old as spiritualism gets. But it came along at a time when we were shifting away from, people who held spiritual views almost as being obvious. Everybody went to church. Everybody tried to do the right thing on a Sunday. Everybody had an idea that they had to follow certain rules about what their church preached about God. But all of a sudden we're moving into the Industrial Revolution, into a very materialistic age, and people are beginning to push the church away. They're beginning to push away spiritual views. There's no doubt that if you look at Christianity and other religions, they do bring to us a form of spiritual worship. There's no doubt about that. Even though it's old and it's an old form of worship, there is no doubt that people who follow, for instance, the tenets of Christianity, which are the basis of our laws, the basis of Western civilization, is rooted in the morality of the Judeo-Christian world. It is very, very, very important. So I'm not trying to diminish in any way what the Judeo-Christian moral and legal system has brought to Western civilization. It is the basis of the way in which we live our lives, the way in which we run our countries. Very, very important. So I don't want to diminish that in any way, shape or form. But it is important that we never get stuck in the past and that we always move on. So as the world was coming into this materialistic age, suddenly out of nowhere comes this thing called spiritualism. Well, the fact is that spiritualism was always there. It's been there ever since cave people were around, ever since human beings were on the planet, because those cave people understood that their ancestors, the people who've passed on, haven't gone away forever and ever. They are actually somewhere near them. Some of them could see them. They drew on their wall paintings. They had spiritual ideas way back then. But it sort of got formalised. These strange ideas sort of got formalised about 150 odd years ago, when people started to communicate with those on the other side. And so we have the birth of spiritualism. And spiritualism, is it an accident that it came along just at a time when the world was moving into a very, very materialistic age? And it's a very material age. The number of people who call themselves atheists, for instance, goes up every year. The number of people who attend the church goes down every year. Given what the church teaches and that it's still stuck in the teachings of 2,000 years ago, I don't blame people. I've often said that really these religions ought to have a hard look at themselves and modernise themselves. Certainly I think spiritualism does that. In the time that I've been a minister, we've taken some pretty hard decisions about modernising our 7 principles, for instance. That was a hard thing to do. You imagine the old spiritualists and how they wanted to hang on to these 7 principles, the wording of them. And somebody comes along and says, no, we need to change them so that they sound more modern, so that modern ears, when they see these things, and they hear them. We used to say, for instance, the first principle was we believe in the fatherhood of God. Now, if you're a lady, it cuts out half the population. Is God really a male? You see? So you don't have that conversation. And that's why the first principle was changed, to be non-gender, to be more inclusive. Now, I don't like identity politics. I think it's one of the worst things that's ever happened. But in this case, when you talk about God, to say that it's male is plainly ridiculous. It's not male, it's not female, it has no gender, it's nothing. We don't know what it is. Let's face it. We just don't know what it is. So if we look at some of the teachings of our philosophy, and there is no better guide to a way of looking at spiritualism than the guide of Maurice Barbanel, Silver Birch. Now, there are a lot of Silver Birch books around, and these books are based on the philosophy of Silver Birch, as the words were spoken through the mouthpiece of Maurice Barbanel. Silver Birch said, our allegiance is not to a book, it is not to a church. And this is this guy who is in the astral planes saying we don't care about books, we don't care about churches. All we care about is the great spirit of the universe and the eternal natural laws of the universe. And he said the Great Spirit is the infinite power that expresses itself through wisdom and love. If you cannot, when you think of God, there are two things you should think about: wisdom and love. There's nothing negative about the concept of God that I have in my mind. In all of my meditation practice, in all of my communication with Spirit, I have never ever had anything negative, never been connected to anything negative. When I have pondered on this concept of God, I've always been filled with bliss and with love. When I've been able to break through those barriers between us and that divine level of understanding, which doesn't happen very often. But when it has happened, it becomes so obvious that there's a field of energy out there which you might call divine love, which we cannot be connected to at all times, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to live here. Let me tell you, the state of being in the presence of that divine energy is so strong, so overpowering, that you cannot live a life as we understand it unless you actually most of the time cut off from it. That's why we don't have an immediate recognition of the fact that this God exists. Let's be very clear about this. You cannot prove God exists. You cannot run an experiment that says, here there's God, and we can prove it. We've got a test tube here, and we fill it up with this stuff, and there you are, there's the existence of God. No, you can't do that. So science quite rightly says, well, we can neither prove nor disprove God. They can't do it. But you can, through meditation and through other practices, prove it for yourself. The problem with that sort of proof is that it's subjective, it's in here. And you can't take that out of your head and show it to another person as proof. So the only way you can demonstrate that proof to other people is for them to go and prove it for themselves. This is why spiritualism puts such a heavy emphasis on meditation classes, because it's through the process of meditation that you will have your own experience of that divine energy. And then you won't have to listen to me, because you'll know for yourself. Because look, ministers in spiritualism are there. We have ministers purely because we need to have some way of marrying people in our own church, giving babies names and burying people, all of those functions which ministers normally do. You need to nominate somebody to do that, but ministers are just people, just like you. Now they've devoted their lives perhaps to having a deeper understanding of the philosophy, and certainly they understand meditation and their links with spirit. They understand it, but they're just people. They've just gone out of their way to really look into these matters, and that's all I have done. Nothing special about me, and there's nothing that I have done that you couldn't do for yourselves. When I talk to people, I remind them of who they actually are. We tend to look at our bodies and, as you approach old age, your hair goes white, and if you're lucky enough to have hair in the first place, and you wonder what it's all about. But really, we need to understand how special we are. We're very, very special people. And I'll say this, it's a scientific fact, we're actually made from stardust. Stardust. Carbon, which underpins all life on this planet, is made in the centre of a star. Under the heat and pressure and explosions, when those things go supernova, you can imagine the energy released under those, when a whole sun explodes. The heat and the pressure is such that it slams atoms into other atoms. Bang, they collide, and they form new substances. And one of those substances they form is carbon, along with metals and such other things. Our star, the sun we live in is actually a third generation star. The material that makes it up has actually gone through 3 phases of existence already. That's why it has metals in it. A newly formed star will only have hydrogen, being forced into becoming helium. So by the time we get carbon, and we have a planet form that has carbon in it, that is capable of sustaining life, and it gives rise to physical bodies such as we have, that carbon is now in a physical body. In life, in the trees and the animals all around you, they share the same basic building blocks of life. But all that life started out inside a star. Now you're in, so here's your physical body. The very least of what you are is your physical body. It's just dust, which will become dust. That's the very least of what you are, and yet that stuff is stardust. Well, what about the rest of you? What about the rest of you? There are parts of us that live in the higher dimensions. We have a soul body which will definitely go on beyond the death of the physical body. I mean, that's a proven fact. There's enough scientific, modern scientific data, I call it data because that's a scientific term, to prove that that is so. I gave a lecture not so long ago at the VSU, I have it here, about Dr. Peter Fenwick. If you look up Dr. Peter Fenwick on YouTube, he gave a talk on, he spent 30 years studying the near-death experience and people dying. He's actually gone to places where people are dying. 30 years he's done this for, and he's watched people pass to the other side. Now this is a neuropsychologist, a man who is the top in his field. Of course, when he says these sorts of things to other scientists, they all think he's a little bit batty. Because this sort of stuff is outside the sphere of scientific research. The moment you present something that's outside the sphere of scientific research, you just get poo-pooed. Nobody wants to know about it. Which is not a very scientific attitude, I might add, but that's the way it is, and that is the way it has always been. So the next question is, what are you doing here? I know you're listening to me at the moment, but why did you come here? Why didn't you just stay up in the astral planes? Because I tell you that life is a lot easier up there. There's no struggle up there to feed yourself every day. There's no getting sick. There's no trying to keep yourself warm or cool, depending on whether it's summer or winter. It's a fairly nice existence. So why bother coming down here? Well, you came in here, and you came down to the physical plane, and the very reason I think the physical universe exists is so that spirits can have an experience which they cannot have in the astral planes. The astral planes, in the astral planes we have this law called the law of harmony and attraction. That you can only deal with people that are in harmony with yourself. Harmony exists. There is no disharmony up there. Which is great, but you tend not to learn very much from that. So you're here, the very fact that you've come here says that you are willing and brave enough. Let me add to that. Let's repeat that. You are willing and you are brave enough to come to a place where this harmony can exist, where people don't get along, where people rub you up the wrong way. And somehow you've got to find a way to work your way through this. I think one of the most important things about marriage is that at least two people can get along. You spend a lifetime with somebody else and find some way of staying together. It's a continual marriage. It's a continual set of compromises. You're not willing to compromise, you're going to find it very, very difficult to stay married. So that institution, and because there's children involved, often people will change because they need to for that marriage to stay together for the sake of the children. Now if you like, it's a form of sacrifice. It's sacrificing what you think you should be doing, all the fun that you could be having, for the sake of an institution called marriage, so that the children can grow up in a loving relationship, or at least in a household that is together. That's a form of sacrifice if the two people don't get along too well. A lot of this, of course, in this modern age has gone a little bit by the by, but we must find ways. There's always, this is the reason, the very reason we come to earth. It's all very well to be friends with somebody that you get along with. It's another thing altogether to know somebody who disagrees with you and challenges you all the time, and yet remain friends with them. That's the real challenge. That is very, very important. So you've come to this physical plane. I keep looking at the clock, by the way. I hope you give me a good indication of when I should stop, because I'll just keep going if you let me. This is the reason we've come here.
Probably soon, Dominic.
Probably soon? Okay. Well, I better get on to the next part, which is very, very important. And that is that you've come here, you have dealt with the physical plane conditions as best as you've been able to. Now that doesn't mean you're perfect. You don't have to be perfect, but you've done the best you can. And the important thing is not whether you believed in God, or whether you went to the spiritualist church or the correct Christian church or whatever. That has absolutely nothing to do with it. The issue is how you've treated other people. That's it. How you've treated other people. Now, we go to a spiritualist church in order that we might learn about what life is all about. You can either have that knowledge or not. Being a very curious sort of a person, I would rather have the knowledge. And I've gone to enormous trouble to get that knowledge. As full an understanding of that knowledge as I can get. The problem with getting a fuller understanding of the knowledge is that then you know that there's lots of other questions you need to ask. So it's a never-ending process. But hey, it's not boring, let me tell you. Not boring. So when you leave this physical plane, having done the best you can with what was given to you, you'll go back to where you came from. You'll go back to the astral planes. And there, again, you will meet with the people close to you, the peoples that you have loved, even the animals that you have loved. And I'm not kidding. Dr. Peter Fenwick says that they saw animals in spirit form come to places where people are dying. People could actually see these animals in there, waiting for their masters or mistresses to pass over, and they'd be waiting there. The dog would be waiting there for them. It's not just that, it's the things that you have loved. All the things that you have loved will be there waiting for you, in a place where there is harmony. And there is no hell. But the one thing, if there's anything I wanted to teach people, ever since I've become a minister and have been involved with the spiritualist movement, is to tell people, for God's sake, there is no hell. There is no punishment of the sort that these terrible people in Christianity have tried to foster onto people. As far as I'm concerned, it's a disgrace what they have done. It is, because they've had people in fear. And the reason they've done it is so they can have control over people. It's a control thing. And they've put people in a situation where they are frightened of passing away. When that moment comes, that moment when we join our loved ones back in the astral planes, there is this element of fear, which has been put there by the 2,000 years of teachings that are really not good teachings. There is no help. Please, if you get nothing else out of this talk, keep that in your mind. It doesn't exist. For the really nasty people on this planet, when they go to the other side, they go to where they are in harmony with the people on the other side, which means if they're really nasty, they end up with the nasty people. It's just a vibrational thing. And for most people, like yourself, myself, we end up in the middle parts of the astral planes, where our loved ones are. That's where we end up. It's a beautiful place to be. All the information, when you talk to the mediums, when you talk to spirit, all the information that comes back is that it's a beautiful, harmonious place. A lovely place to be. I want to remind you that we are all, every one of us, even those people who are not spiritualists, we are all God's children. All of us. Every person on the planet. Every person on the planet is a child of God. And God has infinite patience. And whether it takes you one incarnation or whether in whatever way you believe, we learn, we continue to learn, eventually we make our way back to those realms of spirit that are high enough that we can say, well, we don't need to come back to this earth anymore. We are all God's children. And if there's anything that the spiritualist philosophy teaches, it's such a beautiful philosophy. Silver Birch calls this God the Great Spirit. It's the infinite power that expresses itself through wisdom and love. And spiritualism teaches of a God of love that deals with its children, that's you, through unconditional love. It understands. It doesn't point fingers at you. It understands. And what's more, when you go across the other side, you will understand too why the things that happened had to happen. And you'll be given a chance to make up for some of the things you might not have done quite right, as we all will be given that chance.
Thank you, Dominic.
It's a God of love.
Thank you, Dominic. Thanks very much, Dominic.
You're welcome.
Yes, it's funny. I was only saying the other day that to some people that I was talking to about how internet has brought us together. As you said, we are not physical, we're spiritual, so we can join in any way. So thank you very much for your talk today. So we'll all clap, give the Zoom clap.